That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The wind whipped across the training grounds at Naval Base Coronado, carrying the faint salt tang of the Pacific. Dawn had barely broken, painting the sky in muted greys and oranges as the SEAL team assembled in formation. Boots thudded against the packed sand in precise rhythm, echoing like distant thunder. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant stood at the front, his posture unyielding, the creases in his camouflage uniform sharp enough to cut glass. At his side, Shadow padded silently, a retired Belgian Malinois, graying around the muzzle, his service vest faded from years of deployments. Shadow's eyes, still sharp and alert, scanned the line of operators as if he were part of the count. "Platoon! Attention!" Grant's voice cut through the morning chill, steady and commanding. The men snapped to, shoulders square, chins tucked. They were Team 7, a unit forged in the fires of multiple tours, Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, places where loyalty wasn't just a word, but a lifeline. Grant had led them through it all, his reputation built on quiet competence rather than bravado. Shadow had been his shadow in the field, detecting IEDs, guarding perimeters, even pulling a wounded teammate to safety under fire. Now, at 12 years old, the dog was retired, but Grant refused to relegate him to some distant kennel. Shadow stayed close, a living emblem of the bonds that held the team together. The drill sergeant, Master Chief Harlan Reyes, paced the front, his gaze lingering on Shadow with thinly veiled disapproval. Reyes was new to the team, transferred from a stateside logistics unit, and he prided himself on protocol. "Grant!" he barked, halting inches from the lieutenant commander. "This isn't a petting zoo. Service animals have their place, but not in active formation. Regulations are clear." Grant met Reyes's eyes without flinching. "Shadow's earned his spot, Chief. He's part of this unit's history." The words hung in the air, respectful but firm. Around them the team held position, but murmurs rippled like static over a radio. No one spoke out. Chain of command was sacred here, etched into every salute and order. Reyes snorted, a sound that carried over the wind. "History! That mutt's a relic, seen better days, just like some of us." A few chuckles escaped from the ranks, younger operators, fresh from Bud S, who hadn't yet learned the weight of shared scars. Shadow didn't react. He sat at Grant's heel, ears perked, his breath steady in the cooling air. Grant's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Defiance in the moment could fracture discipline, and discipline was the thin line between survival and chaos. The training commenced as scheduled, a simulated urban assault, weaving through mock buildings on the edge of the base. The team moved in tight stacks, weapons at low ready, calling out clearances in clipped phrases. "Clear left, clear right." Grant took point with a fire team, Shadow trailing just behind, his paws silent on the gravel. The dog had been cleared by base veterinary for light duty, observing, acclimating the newer members to working with K9 assets. But Reyes shadowed the exercise, clipboard in hand, noting every deviation. Halfway through, during a breather near the obstacle course, the mockery escalated. A cluster of trainees, Petty Officer Second Class Marco Ruiz and his buddy, Seaman Kyle Trent, leaned against a Humvee, water bottles in hand. Ruiz, broad-shouldered and quick with a grin, nodded toward Shadow, who lay panting lightly in the shade. "Look at that old-timer. Bet he couldn't sniff out a steak anymore, let alone a threat. Commander must be going soft, keeping him around like a lucky charm." Trent laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, what's next? Wheelchair ramps for the vets? That dog's one bad jump from the scrap heap." Their voices weren't low. They carried on the breeze, drawing glances from the team. Grant, adjusting his gear nearby, heard every word. His hand paused on his rifle sling, fingers curling briefly. Shadow lifted his head, tilting it as if passing the tone, but he didn't rise. Years in the field had taught him to read tension without escalating it. Master Chief Reyes overheard and didn't intervene. Instead, he approached Grant during the next rotation, his tone laced with authority. "Lieutenant Commander, I've got a report to file. Base policy on retired assets. They're to be housed in the kennels, not integrated into drills. You're setting a precedent that's distracting." Reyes glanced at Shadow, who had followed Grant to the firing line, sitting watchful as the team ran marksmanship reps. The dog's presence was a quiet reminder of missions past, but to Reyes, it was clutter in an ordered machine. Grant holstered his sidearm, his voice even. "With respect, Chief, Shadow's detected more threats than most of these rookies have seen deployments. He's not a distraction. He's a lesson in loyalty." The exchange drew eyes. Operators pausing mid-reload, the crack of rounds firing into targets the only underscore. Ruiz and Trent exchanged smirks from afar, their earlier jabs fueling the undercurrent. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the course, the team broke for midday chow. The mess tent hummed with the clatter of trays and low conversation, the air thick with the scent of rehydrated MREs and fresh coffee. Grant sat at a corner table, Shadow at his feet, gnawing on a sanctioned chew toy. The dog's ribs showed faintly under his vest, a testament to age, but his eyes still held that unblinking focus. Ruiz and Trent sauntered by, trays in hand. "Hey, Commander," Ruiz called, loud enough for the tent to hear. "You feeding that old boy table scraps? Might explain why he's sticking around, hoping for a retirement plan." Laughter bubbled up from a few tables, tentative but present. Trent added, "Seriously, sir, ever think about upgrading? That dog's got more miles on him than my grandma's Buick." The tent fell quieter, Fawkes pausing. Grant looked up, his expression neutral, but his grip on his coffee mug whitened at the knuckles. "Petty Officer Ruiz, focus on your own quals. Shadows saved lives, yours included indirectly. Mockery doesn't change facts." The rebuke was measured, no heat, but it landed like a spent casing on concrete. Reyes, entering the tent, caught the tail end. He pulled Grant aside near the serving line, voice low. "This is exactly the issue. Your attachment's breeding resentment. Order him to the kennels, or I'll make it an official directive." Grant's gaze drifted to Shadow, who had sensed the shift and risen to sit alert beside him. The bond was unspoken, years of shared foxholes, the dog's nose guiding them through dust-choked valleys, Grant's hand steadying him after a blast. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tent flaps. Ominous clouds gathered on the horizon, hinting at the storm rolling in from the sea. No one knew yet how it would test them all, how Shadow's instincts would defy the ridicule and pull them back from the edge. But in that moment, the fracture lines were forming, between protocol and conscience, mockery and merit. As the team dispersed for afternoon evolutions, Grant clipped Shadow's lead, walking him toward the edge of the grounds. The dog's pace was steady, unhurried, his ears flicking at the distant rumble of thunder. Grant murmured almost to himself, "We've got this, boy. Always have." But doubt flickered in his chest, the weight of command pressing like the gathering dark. The base routine continued, oblivious, but the air felt charged, waiting for the spark. The afternoon evolutions pushed the team into the grinder of tactical maneuvers, the sky now bruised with thickening clouds that swallowed the sun. Radio chatter crackled over the net as squads rotated through breach-and-clear drills on the mock compound, the sharp pops of simunition rounds punctuating each entry. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant moved with his fire team through the shadowed interiors of the plywood structures, his boots scraping softly against the grit-strewn floor. Shadow stayed at his flank, not participating but mirroring the rhythm, paws lifting in sync, nose twitching at the faint chemical scent of blank cartridges. "Stack up," Grant ordered, his voice a low anchor amid the controlled chaos. The operators complied without hesitation. Petty Officer First Class Lena Torres on his 6, her carbine trained low, followed by the rookies Ruiz and Trent. They had cleared the first room efficiently. Furniture upended for cover, corners swept in practiced arcs. But as they transitioned to the hallway, Reyes' voice cut in over the platoon frequency. "Grant, keep that asset clear of the hot zone. He's not qualsed for this." Grant keyed his mic, breath steady. "Understood, Chief. Shadows observing only." He signaled Torres to hold the line while he guided the dog to a shaded alcove outside, away from the simulated flashbangs. Shadow settled without protest, his flanks rising and falling in even measure, but his eyes tracked Grant's every move. The bond was forged in silence, years of mutual reliance where words were secondary to instinct. Inside, the drill intensified. Ruiz breached the next door with a controlled kick, the frame shuddering under the impact. "Room clear," he called, sweeping his sector. Trent covered the flanks, his movements crisp but edged with the bravado of youth. As the team exfiltrated, linking up for debrief, Ruiz lingered near the entry, glancing back at Shadow through the open door. "Bet that old dog's wondering what all the fuss is about. Probably thinks we're playing fetch." Trent snorted, holstering his sidearm. "Yeah, or he's just waiting for his nap. Commander treats him like he's still earning the chow." Their exchange was casual, tossed off during the cooldown, but it drew nods from a couple of other trainees milling nearby. The base's chain of command tolerated ribbing in private moments, decompression after the grind, but this was edging into the open, where it could erode the unit's cohesion like sand under boot treads. Grant overheard as he approached, Shadow rising to meet him. He didn't address it directly, instead he turned to the group. "Debrief in 5. Focus on entry timings. Torres, your pivot was half a beat slow." The redirection was subtle, steering them back to mission essentials. Torres nodded sharply, her expression unchanging, but she shot a glance at Ruiz that spoke volumes. She had deployed with Shadow before, knew the dog's role in pulling her from a collapsed structure during a training mishap years back. Loyalty wasn't abstract to her. It was etched in the faint scar on her forearm. Master Chief Reyes called the formation for the after-action review under a camouflaged awning, the wind now gusting fitfully, carrying the metallic tang of impending rain. Charts were unrolled on a folding table, marked with timestamps and fault lines from the exercise. The team stood at ease, sweat drying on their uniforms, the air humming with the distant whine of a helo on approach. Reyes pointed to a diagram, his marker tapping rhythmically. "Entry was solid overall, but distractions cost us seconds. Grant, confirm your asset's containment." "Confirmed," Grant replied, his tone level. Shadow sat at parade rest beside him, unmoving as the chief's gaze flicked downward. Reyes paused, then addressed the platoon broadly. "Regulations exist for a reason. Retired K9s are support, not participants. Integrating them blurs lines, breeds familiarity over focus." He didn't name Shadow outright, but the implication hung like humidity in the air. A few operators shifted weight, eyes on the ground. Others, like Ruiz, met the words with barely suppressed smirks. As the review wrapped, the group dispersed toward the gear lockers, the first fat drops of rain spattering the dirt. Grant unclipped Shadow's lead, allowing him a moment to stretch near the water trough. The dog's tongue lolled briefly, lapping at the cool stream, before he lifted his head, ears pricking at a sound beyond the team's chatter. A faint, distant wail carried on the wind, muffled by the thickening storm. Ruiz and Trent, stowing their kit nearby, caught the tail end of Reyes' lecture and amped it up. "Blurs lines. More like the commander's got a soft spot for strays," Ruiz muttered, loud enough to carry as he slung his pack. Trent chuckled, slamming his locker shut. Yeah, next he'll be issuing dog tags for the whole litter. That mutt's deader weight than a rock on a hump. Iron. The words landed amid the clatter of metal and zippers, drawing uneasy glances. Petty Officer Torres paused mid-stride, her jaw setting, but she held her tongue. Rank dictated restraint. Grant straightened from checking his own gear, the rain now pattering steadily on the awning overhead. He approached the pair, his presence alone enough to still their banter. Petty officers? Stow the commentary. This unit runs on respect, earned in the field. His voice was even, no bark, but the weight of command threaded through it. Ruiz straightened, mumbling, "Aye, sir," while Trent avoided eye contact, busying himself with a strap. Reyes observed from afar, arms crossed, then radioed base ops. "Weather's closing in. Secure outdoor evolutions. All personnel to covered areas." The order came just as thunder rolled low, vibrating through the ground. The team hustled toward the barracks, a tight knot against the downpour, but Grant lingered, ensuring Shadow was secure under the overhang. The dog's fur began to dampen at the edges, his body language alert, nose questing into the wind as if sifting for something beyond the rain. Inside the ready room, the mood shifted to routine maintenance. Cleaning weapons, logging sim data, the rhythmic click of bolts, and the scent of gun oil mingling with wet canvas. Grant settled at a workstation, Shadow curling at his feet on a worn blanket. The mockery simmered beneath the surface, unspoken now, but festering, Ruiz and Trent trading glances across the room, Reyes reviewing reports with a critical eye. No one anticipated how the storm would escalate, how a child's cry from the edge of the base would cut through the gale, testing bonds and protocols alike. As evening approached, the rain hammered the tin roof like suppressed fire, visibility dropping to a grey veil outside. Grant reviewed mission logs, his hand absently stroking Shadow's ear. The dog whined softly, a rare sound, his head lifting toward the door. Grant paused, listening. Over the roar, a faint siren wailed from the perimeter, base security alerting to a perimeter breach. A family day event earlier had drawn civilians to the edge of the grounds. One had wandered too far, a young child separated in the chaos of the squall. "Ops, this is Grant." He keyed his radio, voice cutting through static. "What's the sit rep?" The response crackled back. A 4-year-old boy lost near the dunes, visibility near zero. Search teams were mobilizing, but the storm was blinding. Grant's gaze met Shadow's, the dog's eyes steady, unyielding. Years of training surged back, the nose that pierced fog and fear, but Reyes's voice interjected over the net. "Negative on K9 deployment. Assets retired. Stick to protocol." Grant hesitated, the fracture deepening. Outside, the wind howled, carrying echoes of distress. Shadow rose, paws silent on the concrete, ready. The choice loomed, duty clashing with the instinct that had saved them all before. The storm's fury built like an assault wave, rain lashing the ready room windows in relentless sheets, turning the world outside into a churning blur of sand and sea spray. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant stood by the ops desk, radio in hand, the static-laced updates from base security painting a grim picture. The 4-year-old boy, son of a visiting Navy spouse, had slipped away during the family day picnic, chasing a toy into the dunes bordering the training grounds. Now, with visibility down to yards, search teams fanned out in pairs, their calls swallowed by the gale. "Grid 3, negative contact," one operator reported, voice strained over the howl. Grant's mind raced through protocols, thermal sweeps, perimeter sweeps, coordination with local PD. But his eyes kept drifting to Shadow, who paced the edge of the room, nose lifted against the draft seeping under the door. The dog's whine had escalated to a low, insistent rumble, his body coiled with that pre-mission tension Grant knew too well. Shadow's senses cut through chaos where human eyes failed. Odors carried on wind, faint traces of fear sweat or fabric. In deployments past, he'd located buried casualties in zero-vis dust storms, his track unwavering. Master Chief Reyes loomed nearby, arms folded over his chest, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. I said negative on the K9 grunt. He's off the roster, veterinary clearance or not. We deploy human assets first. Flashlights, grids, the works. Reyes' tone brooked no argument, his clipboard clutched like a shield against deviation. The room buzzed with subdued activity. Petty Officer Torres logging coordinates, Ruiz and Trent prepping rain gear, their earlier smirks replaced by the grind of real ops. But Trent shot a glance at Shadow, muttering under his breath to Ruiz. Great! Now the commander's pet gets a shot at glory. Bet he freezes in the wet. Grant ignored the jab, keying his mic again. Security, any scent trails. Childs wearing blue jacket, last seen near the picnic tents. The response was immediate. Wind-whipped cries from the dunes, but no visual. The boy's father, a chief from admin, waited in the comms shack, face pale under the hood of his poncho, murmuring prayers into his phone. Time was bleeding away, hypothermia in these temps, disorientation for a kid that small. Shadow pressed against Grant's leg, his paw tapping insistently on the concrete floor, eyes locked upward. The lieutenant commander knelt briefly, hand on the dog's neck, feeling the familiar warmth through the damp fur. Easy, boy. But doubt gnawed. Disobeying Reyes meant logging an infraction, potential mast review, a stain on his command eval. Loyalty to protocol kept the machine running. Bending it could idle the whole unit. Yet Shadow's gaze held no such calculus, just raw, unfiltered drive. Reyes stepped closer, voice dropping to a command whisper. Stand down, Lieutenant. You're not thinking straight. That dog's a liability in this, could get tangled in the lines, spook the searchers. His words carried the weight of rank, but Grant caught the flicker of uncertainty in the chief's eyes. Reyes was logistics through and through, not field-tested like the SEALs. Storms like this were spreadsheets, not instincts. The decision crystallized in a heartbeat. Grant straightened, clipping Shadow's lead. With respect, Chief, he's located worse in worse conditions. I'm deploying him, logged as auxiliary support. He moved for the door. Before Reyes could counter, the team falling in behind without a word. Torres grabbed a harness light, nodding once. Even Ruiz and Trent hesitated only a second before following, rain gear rustling. The mockery from earlier hung unspoken now, drowned by the urgency. Outside, the world was a maelstrom, wind shoving like an unseen enemy, rain stinging exposed skin like shrapnel. Grant and Shadow took point, the dog plunging into the dunes with purpose, nose low to the shifting sand. The team strung out in a loose skirmish line, 20 yards apart, calling grid checks over the net. Sector Alpha clear. Mud sucked at boots, visibility a wall of grey, but Shadow pulled steady, his lead taut, weaving through clumps of seagrass. Grant's flashlight beam danced erratically, catching glimpses of debris, tossed picnic blankets, a child's abandoned sandal half buried. Deeper in, the dune crests muffled the bass noise, leaving only the roar and Shadow's focused breaths. The dog paused suddenly, ears flattening, then veered left toward a shallow depression. Grant signaled the team. Tighten intervals. Possible contact. Ruiz, sweeping parallel, grumbled over the radio. This better not be a wild goose chase. Old dog's probably chasing ghosts. But his voice lacked conviction. The storm stripped bravado bare. Then Shadow bolted, lead yanking from Grant's gloved hand in a surge of muscle memory. Shadow heel! Grant called, but the dog was gone, vanishing into the sheets of rain. Panic spiked, visions of the aged Malinois lost or injured. But Grant pushed forward, boots pounding the soft rise. The team converged, lights converging like stars in fog. They crested the dune to find Shadow crouched low, nosing at a tangle of driftwood and soaked brush. There, huddled small and shivering, was the boy, face streaked with mud, arms wrapped around his knees. Blue jacket sodden and torn. He looked up, eyes wide with terror, as Shadow nosed closer, whining softly to coax him out. The dog circled once, then gently gripped the child's jacket collar in his jaws, not biting, but lifting with practiced care, as if retrieving a downed teammate. Grant dropped to one knee, scooping the boy into his arms as Shadow released. The dog's tail a faint wag amid the downpour. "Easy, kid, we've got you." The child clung, burying his face in Grant's vest, sobs muffled against the fabric. Over the net, Reyes' voice crackled. "Report!" Grant keyed back, rain dripping from his brow. "Contact positive. Asset located the target. Exfil now." The return was a slog, team bracketing the pair, Shadow padding alongside, unerring through the buffeting winds. Back at the ready room, medics swarmed the boy, wrapping him in thermal blankets, his father rushing forward with choked thanks. The room fell quiet as the truth sank in. Shadow's nose had pierced the storm, where tech and manpower faltered. Reyes stood at the threshold, water pooling at his feet, expression unreadable. Ruiz and Trent hovered nearby, faces drained of color, the weight of their earlier words settling like wet sand. No one spoke the mockery aloud now. It had crumbled under the dog's quiet heroism. Grant unclipped Shadow's lead, the Malinois shaking off the rain before curling at his feet, spent but satisfied. The fracture in protocol had held, conscience over command, loyalty proven in the gale. As the storm eased to a steady drum on the roof, the base hummed with after-action whispers, the incident rippling through the chain. Grant met Reyes's gaze across the room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The old dog had carried more than a child that night. He'd hauled the team's doubt back into the light. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The fluorescent lights in the ready room buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the drying gear and scattered charts as the storm's remnants tapped a fading rhythm on the roof. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant leaned against the ops desk, towel drying Shadow's coat with methodical strokes, the Malinois' fur releasing droplets that pattered onto the concrete like distant Morse code. The boy was en route to the base clinic now, bundled in a medic's arms, his small form stabilized against the chill. Whispers circulated among the team, Petty Officer Torres murmuring coordinates to the log, others stowing rain-slicked equipment with quiet efficiency. The air smelled of wet canvas, salt, and the faint metallic bite of adrenaline ebbing away. Master Chief Reyes crossed the threshold fully, his poncho shedding water in a widening puddle, boots leaving muddy imprints that tracked toward Grant. His face was a mask of regulation, jaw set under the brim of his cap, but his eyes betrayed a flicker, assessment, perhaps grudging recalibration. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, voice pitched for the room's ears, "that deployment was unauthorized. Protocol's clear. Retired assets stay benched. You'll need to submit a full report. Deviation from OPS order." Grant straightened, handing the towel to a nearby corpsman before meeting Reyes's gaze. "Chief, the asset performed. Lives were at stake. Child's life. I'll log it as I saw it." His tone remained even, threaded with the unyielding calm that had carried him through command briefs in forward operating bases, where decisions balanced on split-second ethics. Shadow shifted at his feet, shaking off the last of the damp, his ears perking as if attuned to the undercurrent. The dog leaned into Grant's leg briefly, a subtle press of warmth that grounded the moment amid the scrutiny. Reyes glanced at Shadow, then back, his clipboard emerging from under his arm like a summons. "Respectfully, sir, that's not how it works. Chain of command isn't optional. It's the spine of this unit. I'll initiate the inquiry myself. Base JAG will want details on the breach." He turned to the team, addressing them broadly. All personnel involved, statements by 600, focus on facts, wind speeds, vis, asset positioning. The words landed with procedural weight, no accusation yet, but the implication rippled. Accountability for the defiance, starting with Grant. Petty Officer Ruiz and Seaman Trent lingered near the gear racks, their postures less assured now. Hands pausing on rifle cases. Ruiz cleared his throat, stepping forward hesitantly. "Chief, the dog. He nailed it out there. Pulled that kid right from the muck. Without him, we'd still be gritting in the dark." His voice carried a note of concession, the earlier bravado eroded by the night's raw proof. Trent nodded beside him, eyes on the floor, the weight of his prior jabs unspoken, but evident in the tight line of his shoulders. Reyes held up a hand, silencing the interjection. "Appreciated, Petty Officer, but sentiment doesn't rewrite regs. The commander's call was the issue. We'll address it through channels." He jotted a note, the pen scratching like radio static, then nodded to Grant. "Sir, my office, 0800. Bring your logs." With that, he exited, the door swinging shut behind him with a definitive click, leaving the room to exhale. Torres approached Grant as the team dispersed to bunks, her voice low amid the clatter of lockers. "That was solid work, sir. Shadow's nose doesn't lie, neither does the result." She knelt briefly, offering the dog a measured pat on the flank, her fingers lingering on the faded service vest. Shadow accepted it with a soft huff, his tail thumping once against the floor, a rare display that spoke volumes in the quiet. Grant nodded, his hand resting on the dog's head. "Appreciate the backup, Torres. Keep the rookies sharp. This isn't over." By dawn, the base stirred under a clearing sky. The Pacific's horizon streaked with pale light, filtering through scattered clouds. Grant walked Shadow along the perimeter path, the gravel crunching under their steps, the air crisp with ozone and eucalyptus from the inland hills. The dog's pace was deliberate, joints stiff from the night's exertions, but his head held high, scanning the tree line as if debriefing himself. Grant's mind replayed the rescue, the lead slipping free, Shadow's surge into the gale, the boy's small form emerging from the brush like a found artifact. Defiance had bridged the gap, but now the institutional gears turned, reports cascading up the chain, potential reprimands etching into his file. Back at quarters, Grant reviewed his statement on a laptop, the screen's glow illuminating the sparse room. Cot neatly made, Shadow's blanket folded in the corner, a single-frame photo of the team in Afghanistan, dust-caked faces, the Malinois at center. He typed with precision, timestamps, wind vectors from Met reports, Shadow's auxiliary role justified by precedent from prior K9 integrations. No embellishment, facts as unyielding as boot leather, yet doubt threaded through. A formal inquiry could sideline him, fracture team trust, relegate Shadow to true retirement, kennels far from the unit's pulse. The Aero 800 meeting unfolded in Reyes's office, a cramped space off the admin block, walls lined with binders, and a single window overlooking the training fields. The Master Chief sat behind his desk, steam rising from a mug of black coffee, the scent sharp in the confined air. Grant entered at attention, saluting crisply. "Reporting as ordered, Chief." Shadow waited outside, leashed to a post, his low whine filtering through the door like a sentinel's alert. Reyes gestured to the chair opposite, his expression neutral. "At ease, Lieutenant. Walk me through it. Why deploy against directive?" Grant sat, posture straight, recounting the sequence. The whine, the instinct, the vanishing trail in zero viz. Protocol prioritizes human assets, but Shadow's track record, 8 confirmed recoveries in theater, outweighed the risk. The boy was minutes from exposure. Waiting wasn't viable. Reyes leaned back, tapping a folder, preliminary statements from the team. Torres corroborates. Even Ruiz and Trent noted the efficiency. But JAG's involved now. Base command's reviewing for policy gaps on retired K9s. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. Your call saved the kid, no denying that. But it sets precedent. Every operator thinking they can freelance? Grant met the gaze steadily. Not freelance, Chief. Judged response. Loyalty in this unit isn't just to regs, it's to what we've built. The words hung, respectful but pointed, echoing the silent bond with Shadow beyond the door. Reyes exhaled, closing the folder. Understood. I'll forward with recommendation for auxiliary clearance review, but expect scrutiny, interviews, maybe a board. As Grant exited, Shadow rose to greet him, nose bumping his hand in routine affirmation. The base routine resumed, formations assembling under the morning sun, the wind now a gentle breeze carrying the salt tang anew. Word spread through the ranks, quiet nods in the chow line, operators glancing at Shadow with renewed respect. Ruiz approached during a water break, voice subdued. Sir, about before. The talk was out of line. That dog earned his keep last night. Trent echoed it nearby, a mumbled apology swallowed by the hum of activity. Grant acknowledged with a curt nod. No lecture. Learn from it, petty officer. Unit's only as strong as its trust. The exchange was brief, mission-focused, but it marked a shift, the mockery's echo fading, replaced by the grind of shared purpose. By midday, the inquiry's ripples reached higher. A captain from Ops called Grant to the comms center, reviewing footage from perimeter cams, grainy but clear, Shadow's form cutting through the storm like a guided round. Impressive, the captain said, voice over the speaker. Base vets on board for light reactivation, but document everything. This could inform K9 policy tweaks. Relief edged Grant's response, tempered by the ongoing watch. Forms to file, witness logs to compile. As the sun arced toward afternoon, Grant and Shadow joined a low-key patrol along the dunes, the sand still damp and firm underfoot. The dog's steps were measured, but his nose quested actively, a reminder of capabilities undimmed by age. The rescue had cracked the protocol's rigidity, inviting questions of reform, how to honor service beyond retirement, balance instinct with order. In the quiet expanse, Grant murmured to the Malinois, "You did good, boy, we all did." Shadow's ear flicked, as if in agreement, the bond a steady anchor amid the institutional tide turning. The base commander's conference room felt like a pressure chamber, its walls paneled in polished oak that absorbed sound, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the scratch of pens on notepads. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant sat at the long table's far end, uniform pressed to regulation creases, his hands folded precisely on the surface. Shadow waited outside in the corridor, leashed to a bench, his paws clicking softly against the tile as he shifted position. The dog's presence had been cleared for the morning, veterinary note in hand, but even that concession carried the scent of scrutiny. Captain Harlan Voss presided from the head, a veteran of carrier ops with a gaze that dissected statements like intel briefs. Flanking him were two JAG officers, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, sharp-eyed and methodical, flipping through a stack of preliminary reports, and Commander Derek Hale, who observed with the detached air of a man who'd mediated more tribunals than he cared to count. Master Chief Reyes sat to Grant's left, posture rigid, his folder open to a timeline of the storm incident. The room's single window overlooked the training fields, where a platoon drilled in the midday sun, their calls drifting in like distant echoes. "Let's begin with the directive," Voss said, his voice even, cutting through the quiet like a knife through canvas. "Chief Reyes, walk us through the ops order." Reyes nodded, clearing his throat. At 1900 hours, base security reported the missing child. I issued a standard search protocol. Human teams. Grid sweeps, thermal assists. Explicit negative on retired K9 deployment. Asset status per Reg 1124. 3. Section 4. Non-operational. He glanced at Grant. No malice, just the flat recitation of chain. The words hung, procedural and unyielding, the foundation of the inquiry. Vasquez leaned forward, her pen tapping once. "Lieutenant Commander Grant, your response?" Grant met her eyes steadily, recounting the sequence without inflection. The radio chatter, Shadow's alert whine, the vanishing visibility in the dunes. The asset's instincts aligned with the threat assessment. Hypothermia risk escalating. I logged it as auxiliary support, citing prior K-9 precedents from theater ops. He slid a printed excerpt across the table, declassified after action from Afghanistan, where Shadow had tracked a downed airman through a sandstorm. The paper rustled softly, its edges crisp. Hale reviewed it, nodding faintly. Precedent noted, but unauthorized deployment risks unit cohesion. Witnesses, Petty Officers Ruiz and Trent, described the lead slipping during the search, potential for asset compromise. Grant's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The memory of the rain-slicked line, yanking free, flashing back, the wind's howl, Shadows surge into the grey. "Calculated risk, sir." The dog returned with the locate. No compromise occurred. Outside, Shadow whined low, as if sensing the defense, his nose pressing under the door crack. Reyes interjected, voice measured. "Sir, with respect, that's hindsight. In the moment, it was defiance, could have tangled the searchline, diverted resources." The chief's tone carried the weight of logistics training, order as armor, deviation as fracture. Voss raised a hand, silencing the exchange. "This isn't a court-martial, gentlemen. It's a review for policy gaps. But facts matter. The child was recovered intact, asset performed without incident. Still, the breach sets eyes on the unit." Word of the inquiry had leaked through the base like humidity after rain. Operators in the chow hall trading hushed details over trays of reconstituted eggs. A nod toward Grant, carrying new layers of speculation. By afternoon, it escalated. A local news affiliate, tipped by a spouse from the Family Day event, requested access for a segment on heroic rescue amid storm. Base PAO approved a limited embed, cameras in the ready room, interviews with the father, who clutched a photo of his son, eyes still rimmed red from the ordeal. Grant stood in the ops bay as the crew set up, lights harsh against the scuffed walls, the scent of fresh coffee undercut by cable insulation. Shadow sat at his heel, vest brushed clean, his grey muzzle catching the glare. The reporter, a compact woman named Kira Lang, approached with a microphone extended. "Commander Grant, sources say you deployed a retired service dog against orders. Walk us through that call." Her voice was professional, probing without edge, but the camera's red light blinked like an interrogator's eye. Grant's response was clipped. "Mission-focused. Protocol guides us, but lives demand judgment. Shadow's training bridged the gap, located the child in zero visibility." He didn't elaborate on the mockery that preceded it. That was internal, not for the lens. Lang turned to Reyes, who stood arms crossed nearby. "Chief, concerns about chain of command?" Reyes paused, weighing his words. "Discipline holds the line. We'll review to strengthen it." The exchange aired live on the evening feed, rippling out to affiliates. The story framed as "SEALs Defiant Dog Saves Day," headlines flickering across screens in officers' quarters. Back in the barracks, the team absorbed it during downtime. Torres scrolling her phone in the bunkroom, the glow illuminating her face as comments poured in. Support for the old warrior, questions on regs bending for heroes. Ruiz and Trent sat on adjacent cots, rain gear still drying from a morning hump, their earlier apologies now tested by the spotlight. "Media's eating it up," Ruiz said, voice low, rubbing his neck. "But if Jag nails the skipper—" Trent trailed off, staring at the floor, the weight of his past jabs resurfacing like damp rot. Grant entered then, Shadow padding beside, the dog's nails clicking a steady rhythm. "At ease," he said, sensing the tension. No lecture. Instead, he pulled a chair, addressing them directly. Inquiries standard, facts over noise, focus on quals. This unit doesn't fold under eyes. Torres nodded, pocketing her device. Aye, sir. Shadow's the real story. Earned his spot twice over. The dog settled near the bunks, tail thumping once, his presence a quiet anchor amid the scrutiny. By evening, the ripples hit higher, an email from Pacific Fleet Command requesting a briefing on K9 integration policies, the rescue cited as a case study. Voss called Grant to his office post-mess, the room dim with desk lamplight. Steam curling from mugs of decaf. Media's amplifying it, good and bad, fathers pushing for Shadow's commendation, Jags weighing auxiliary status. Voss's tone held approval, edged with caution. Your call was right, but it exposes cracks. Recommend you testify at the policy board next week. Advocate for reform without undermining chain. Grant saluted, exiting into the cooling night, Shadow at his side. The base perimeter lights cast long shadows on the path, the Pacific's waves murmuring beyond the fence. The dog's steps were sure, nose questing the breeze, undaunted by the institutional gaze. Grant's hand rested briefly on his head, feeling the steady pulse beneath the fur. The public reckoning had ignited, cameras, questions, the fracture laid bare. But in the quiet, loyalty's proof endured, pushing toward change one measured step at a time. As the inquiry's documents piled on desks, the team's drills resumed under watchful eyes, the wind carrying whispers of what Shadow's defiance might yet redeem. The policy board convened in the base's briefing theater, a cavernous space with tiered seating and a projector screen that flickered to life under the hum of cooling fans. Rows of chairs filled with officers from across the Pacific Fleet, commanders in starched khakis, JAG reps with legal pads at the ready, and a handful of K9 handlers from allied units, their boots polished to a subdued gleam. The air carried the faint scent of industrial cleaner and fresh printed agendas, the room's acoustics amplifying every shuffle and cough into something formal, inevitable. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant entered through the side door, Shadow at his heel on a short lead, the Malinois paws silent on the carpeted aisle. The dog's vest had been updated overnight. Clean insignia, a temporary auxiliary tag clipped to the collar, his graying coat brushed to military precision. Grant took his seat at the witness table, posture straight as a rifle barrel, his hands resting open on the polished wood. Captain Voss nodded from the panel's center, flanked by Lieutenant Vasquez and a fleet-wide K9 coordinator, Commander Lila Chen, whose expertise spanned deployments from the Gulf to the Arctic. Master Chief Reyes sat in the observer row, arms crossed, his expression a study in neutral observation. The board's chair, Rear Admiral Marcus Hale, no relation to the JAG officer, cleared his throat, his voice resonating through the speakers. Lieutenant Commander Grant, this session reviews the Coronado incident for potential policy amendments on retired service animals. State your case. Grant rose slightly, acknowledging the panel with a measured nod. Admiral, the storm rescue highlighted a gap. Protocols bench experienced assets too rigidly, sidelining instincts proven in theater. He gestured subtly to Shadow, who sat alert beside him. Ears perked toward the voices, nose twitching at the room's circulating air. Grant detailed the sequence without flourish. Wind speeds clocked at 40 knots, visibility under 10 meters, the child's vitals teetering on exposure. Shadow's deployment, though unauthorized, yielded a positive outcome. Precedent from Ops in Helmand supports auxiliary use. 8 recoveries, 0 asset losses. He slid prepared exhibits across the table. Veterinary evals, declassified logs, even a time-stamped video clip from the perimeter cams. Grainy footage of the dog surging through the rain-swept dunes. Vasquez leaned forward, her questions precise as crosshairs. And the chain of command breach, Chief Reyes' directive was explicit. Grant met her gaze evenly. Acknowledged, ma'am. But doctrine evolves, FM 305. 212 on special ops assets allows commander discretion in exigent circumstances. The risk to the child outweighed procedural delay. Outside the theater, through the narrow window slits, the training grounds stirred. Operators running low crawls under barbed wire, their grunts faint against the panel's murmur. Shadow shifted once, his flank brushing Grant's knee, a silent reinforcement amid the scrutiny. Chen interjected, her tone informed by field hours. The dog's age, 12 years. Joint health per the vet report shows stiffness. How do we scale this without liability? Grant nodded, pulling up a digital slide on the shared screen. Shadow's service timeline, from Bud-S integration to retirement honors. Light duty only, ma'am. Observation in drills. Auxiliary in low-vis ops. He's not front line, but his nose retains acuity. Odor detection at 98% efficacy per last calibration. The panel reviewed the data in silence, the projector's fan whirring like distant rotor blades. Reyes remained still, but his eyes flicked to the screen, the chief's logistics mind parsing the metrics against regs. The session stretched into the afternoon, testimonies layering like mission briefs, Torres recounting the team's grid efforts, futile against the gale. The boy's father, via video link from the clinic, voice steady over the connection. That dog found my son when nothing else could. If it saves one more family. His words trailed, the screen freezing on his grateful nod. Ruiz and Trent appeared next, summoned as witnesses, their uniforms crisp but faces etched with the night's lesson. Ruiz stood at attention, voice clear. Sir, ma'am, hour earlier. Commentary was misplaced. Shadow proved his value. We backed the commander's call. Trent echoed it shorter. No excuses, panel. The dog carried the weight. Admiral Hale adjourned for deliberation. The room emptying in orderly waves. Officers filing out to the corridor, where base personnel lingered, catching fragments through the doors. Word had spread via the PAO's updates. The board's focus on K9 legacy protocols, headlines now national, from military times to evening news cycles. In the SEAL team's ready room, the broadcast played on a muted screen during gear maintenance. The clack of cleaning rods underscoring the narrator's recap. Operators paused mid-wipe, eyes on Shadow's image, frozen in the storm's blur, the dog's jaws gentle on the child's collar. Grant walked Shadow back to quarters under the afternoon sun, the path's gravel crunching in steady cadence, the Pacific's salt breeze ruffling the Malinois ears. The dog's steps held a subtle hitch from the night's exertions, but his head lifted high, scanning the horizon, as if debriefing the day's echoes. Doubt lingered in Grant's chest. The board could affirm reform or reinforce the bench, careers hinging on interpretations of loyalty versus line. Yet the public eye had amplified it. Emails from Fleet Command praising the model of adaptive discipline, even a petition from spouses circling online, advocating for Shadow's commendation. Evening brought the team's formation in the chow hall, trays clattering under fluorescent lights, the air thick with rehydrated stew and fresh bread. Grant sat with his fire team, Shadow at his feet on a designated mat, gnawing a vet-approved biscuit. Torres slid into the seat across, her fork pausing. Panel go smooth, sir? Grant nodded once, keeping it brief. Facts presented, outcome pending. Ruiz, at the end of the table, met his eyes. Whatever they decide, Shadow's earned the stripe. We all saw it. The words carried no mockery now, just the grind-worn respect of shared foxholes. Trent added quietly, learned that the hard way, sir. Reyes approached then, tray in hand, pulling up a chair uninvited, a rarity that stilled the table. Heard the testimonies, he said, voice low amid the hall's hum. Ruiz, Trent, clean statements, good. He glanced at Shadow, the dog lifting his head to regard the chief with unblinking calm. Assets case is solid, Grant. My report notes the breach, but recommends auxiliary clause. Chain bends. doesn't break. The concession hung. Procedural olive branch extended, the fracture mending in the mess's routine rhythm. As night fell, the base quieted to the whisper of waves and distant helo patrols, Grant reviewing board notes by desk lamp in his quarters. Shadow curled on his blanket, breaths even, the room's shadows soft, the inquiry's weight pressed, but ripples of change stirred. Chen's post-session email hinting at a draft policy, integrating retired K-9s for mentorship roles, sent training for rookies. The dog's quiet heroism had pierced the regs, legacy forming not in fanfare, but in measured amendments, honor upheld through the system's slow turn. In the days that followed, the whispers evolved into action. A commendation ceremony slated, Shadow's name etched into unit lore, the mockery long buried under the storm's proof. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Shadow reach those who still believe in honor. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the base commander's office, casting striped shadows across the oak desk where Captain Voss reviewed the final board recommendations. Lieutenant Commander Elias Grant stood at attention before him, the faint scent of polished leather from his boots mingling with the crisp pages of the policy addendum. Shadow sat precisely at his heel, the Malinois' flanks rising in steady rhythm, his eyes fixed on the room's single potted fern as if it held tactical significance. The dog's temporary auxiliary tag gleamed under the light, a small brass emblem of the shift underway. Voss looked up, his expression one of measured approval. The panel's unanimous, Grant. No reprimand for the breach, deemed exigent under revised discretion clauses. Shadows reinstated for auxiliary roles. Sent calibration for trainees, low-risk support in base ops. He slid the document across, its edges whispering against the wood. You'll lead the integration pilot. Mentor handlers on balancing instinct with protocol. Fleet-wide rollout if it holds. Grant saluted crisply, his voice even. Understood, sir. We'll document every step. Relief threaded through him, subtle as the Pacific's undertow, but he kept it reined. Discipline demanded restraint. Outside, the training grounds hummed with routine. The sharp cadence of boots on gravel, a K-9 unit running obedience drills, the distant crackle of radio checks. The inquiry had peeled back layers, exposing not just one defiance, but systemic blind spots. Retired assets sidelined too soon, loyalty quantified by age rather than efficacy. Word cascaded through the unit by midday chow, the mess tent alive with the clatter of trays and the low murmur of approval. Petty Officer Torres slid into line beside Grant, her tray balanced with precision. Heard the news, sir. Shadow's back in the mix. About time regs caught up. She nodded to the dog, who waited patiently under the table, his nose questing the air for fallen crumbs. Grant's response was brief. Pilot program starting next week. You'll assist on the handler quals. Torres's eyes sharpened with focus. She'd seen the bond's power firsthand, now tasked to pass it on. Across the tent, Ruiz and Trent sat with a cluster of rookies, their postures less guarded than before. Ruiz pushed his tray aside, voice carrying just enough. That old-timer's teaching us now. Figures, after dragging that kid out, he's got cred we can't touch. Trent nodded, no smirk this time, his fork tracing patterns in his mashed potatoes. The mockery that had simmered in whispers had evaporated in the storm's wake, replaced by a grudging apprenticeship. Later, during afternoon evolutions, Grant assigned them to Shadow's first calibration run. A simple scent trail through the obstacle course, the dog leading with unerring pulls on the line. Follow his lead, Grant instructed, clipping the harness as the team assembled under the awning. The air held the earthy tang of damp sand from last night's drizzle, wind whispering through the chain-link perimeter. Shadow nosed the ground at the start point. A faint whiff of training oil planted by the vet tech, then surged forward, pace measured, joints holding without falter. Ruiz took the lead position, his boots sinking to the dog's rhythm, Trent bracketing on the flank. Easy pulls, Grant called over the net. He's calibrating you, not the other way. The rookies trailed, eyes on the Malinois' form, learning the subtle cues. Ear flicks for wind shifts, pauses for false trails. No Hollywood flair, just the quiet grind of trust building, one step at a time. Master Chief Reyes observed from the sidelines, stopwatch in hand, his clipboard now marked with metrics rather than infractions. As the run concluded, Shadow settling with a satisfied huff, Reyes approached Grant. "Efficient," he said, voice pitched for the group. "Assets integrating clean, no distractions. My logistics input, scale it for multi-unit drills." The chief's concession was procedural, but it bridged the fracture. Order adapting, not fracturing under conscience. Grant nodded. "Appreciate the support, Chief. Joint brief next month." Reyes affirmed with a curt salute, the exchange sealing a new alignment in the chain. By week's end, the reform rippled outward. A fleet directive circulated, amending K9 regs to include legacy auxiliary status, retired handlers mentoring on base, their instincts sharpening the next generation. Shadow became the pilot's emblem, his photo appended to the policy memo, a declassified still from the rescue, showing him emerging from the dunes with the boy. Base-wide, handlers rotated through sessions, Belgian Malinois pups shadowing the elder, noses to ground in tandem, the air filled with the soft commands and paw pads on packed earth. Grant testified at a virtual symposium for Pacific Command, his screen shared with officers from Pearl Harbor to Diego Garcia, voice steady over the connection. "Loyalty isn't retired, it's redeployed. This saves time in the field, builds cohesion from day one." The commendation ceremony unfolded on a clear Saturday dawn, the parade ground swept clean, flags snapping in the breeze off the bay. A small assembly gathered, the team in dress blues, the boys' family in the front row, cameras from PAO capturing the formalities without flash. Rear Admiral Hale pinned the auxiliary meritorious unit citation to Shadow's vest, the brass catching the light as the dog stood unmoving, tail still. "For service beyond the call," Hale intoned, his words echoing off the hangar walls. Grant accepted the handler's commendation next, a silver oak leaf cluster for his ribbons. His salute held a beat longer, eyes meeting the Admiral's in silent acknowledgement. The father approached afterward, the boy clinging to his hand, eyes wide at Shadow's height. "Thank you," he said simply, kneeling to offer the dog a gentle scratch. Shadow leaned in, nose bumping the child's palm, a soft whine of recognition. Ruiz and Trent stood nearby, uniforms impeccable, their roles in the search noted in the program. "Learned a lot from him," Ruiz admitted to the father, voice low. The transformation was etched in small gestures, rookies volunteering for K9 rotations, Reyes incorporating asset metrics into his briefings, the base's rhythm pulsing with renewed purpose. As the assembly dispersed, Grant walked Shadow along the waterfront path, the gravel yielding under their steps, waves lapping steadily against the pilings. The Malinois' gait was sure, the sun warming his coat, his head tilting toward the horizon where sea met sky. Grant's hand rested on the dog's shoulder, feeling the steady rise of loyalty that had weathered storms both literal and institutional. The defiance had sparked not rebellion, but refinement, the system learning to honor what it once dismissed. Conscience woven into command. In the quiet expanse, Shadow paused, ears perking at a distant gull's cry. His legacy carried forward not in medals, but in the unbreakable thread binding handler to hound, unit to unbreakable trust. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of They Mocked the Seal's Old Service Dog, until it carried a lost child out of the storm. See you in the next one. The echo of that storm lingered in every drill, a reminder that true strength lies in the bonds that protocol alone cannot forge.